Jennifer Rubin, in her column for today in the Washington Post, refers to the Supreme Court's abject partisanship. And her reference is that Trump can count on it. You know, I assume to the extent of declaring that Colorado had no business taking this orange Antichrist off their ballot. But as Jennifer Rubin points out, by any objective reading of the Constitution, Trump should be disqualified from Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, blah, blah, blah. And Jennifer Rubin feels that the Supreme Court will have a hard time reversing the Colorado Supreme Court's decision. But that doesn't mean that the U.S. Supreme Court won't reverse it. And then she points out some things that the Trump treasonous lawyers have tried to present in their defense of Trump before the Supreme Court. First of all, as Rubin points out, the president is without a doubt an officer under Section 3, even though the argument is being made now by the Trump attorneys that the president of the United States is not an officer of the United States. They're trying to say that the word officer is used to refer to appointees made by the president because that clause in the body of the Constitution, or as Jennifer points out, that part of the Constitution is utterly irrelevant to the use of it now, more than 150 years later, to protect the Union at the time that the 14th Amendment was added to the Constitution, to protect the Union from the former traitorous dogs called Confederates. In any event, the phrase hold any office, which is what the 14th Amendment says someone involved in insurrection cannot do, the phrase sweeps in the presidency. And as the Supreme Court noted, quote, the Constitution refers to the presidency as an office 25 times. So it doesn't stand a reason that someone who holds that office is considered an officer. Well, yes, it does in the real world, but in Trump world, no. It doesn't at all. Why not? Because it doesn't. Oh, my God. Now, before the Colorado Supreme Court issued the ruling, they had an evidentiary hearing where they listened to everything that they possibly could to determine whether or not Trump should be kicked off the ballot in that state. And that evidentiary hearing also confirmed that Trump had, quote, engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof, end quote, which is what the paragraph 3 of the 14th Amendment states. And the Colorado Supreme Court found that Trump had, in fact, done that. And in fact, as Jennifer Rubin points out, the Colorado Supreme Court's exact discussion of its ruling reiterated that, quote, the record amply established that the events of January 6 constituted a concerted and public use of force or threat of force by a group of people to hinder or prevent the U.S. government from taking the actions necessary to accomplish the peaceful transfer of power in this country. Under any viable definition, this constituted an insurrection, end quote. Well, yes, if you have more than 50% of your brain able to come to logical conclusions. If you are presented with evidence that a bowl is round, you can't sit there and say, well, no, I get what you're saying, that the bowl is round, but no, it's really square. When all the evidence, the fact that the bowl is made in a round manner, would indicate that you're looking at a round bowl. Oh, Jesus Christ. And as Rubin points out, in addition, contrary to the worshipers of the Antichrist, there's no requirement in the text of the 14th Amendment requiring a conviction before being disqualified to run for office. And Rubin says, had the framers intended to make that a precondition, they surely would have said so. And she points out that the conviction of former Confederates was not required under Section 3, just if they participated in the insurrection. And finally, Rubin points out that the arguments that the 14th Amendment is not self-executing, which means requiring an act of Congress. She says that's just simply wrong. Individuals routinely bring suits directly under the due process and equal protection clauses of Section 1 of the 14th. As with Section 1, she writes, Congress may write enforcement legislation for Section 3, but none is necessary. And I believe that's because Section 3, I'm sure Tom Hartman has explained this fully, Section 3 is self-evident. I mean, it says what it says. It's in the Constitution. Oh my God, it's right there. Anyone who engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution or given aid or comfort to the enemies of the Constitution are prohibited from holding public office under the United States. What could be simpler or clearer than that? But, the treasonous attorneys of Donald Trump are going to try to get the Supreme Court justices, and they'll succeed in arguing about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. In other words, what is the definition of the word the? I think that was Bill Clinton's defense when they caught him in a perjury trap, right? Now, Rubin goes on and says that an honest originalist, somebody who, a Supreme Court justice who says, I'm an originalist where it concerns the Constitution, well, that person would be compelled to agree with the Colorado Supreme Court. Our democracy, she writes, disallows certain candidates for president. And this is true. People who are foreign born, people who are under the age of 35, insurrectionists. And as constitutional scholar we're all familiar with, Jamie Raskin, said on CNN State of the Union, I think it was this past Sunday, quote, I have a colleague who's a great young politician, Maxwell Frost. He's 26. He can't run for president. Would we say that that's undemocratic? Well, that's the rules of the Constitution. If you don't like the rules of the Constitution, change the Constitution, end quote, Jamie Raskin. And for someone like me, simple-minded as I am, that makes perfect sense. The Constitution says blah, 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 blah regarding somebody who wants to be president. They are prohibited if they're under 35. That's not a political question. It's just the way the rules were written. They cannot run for president if they weren't born in this country. That's not political. That's just the way the rules were written. And the rules also say that anyone engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution can't run for public office again. What is hard about that? What is difficult to understand? So, as Rubin points out, if the Constitution is to mean anything, according to the originalists, the text must be followed even if the outcome of following the text is politically dicey. Unless and until it's changed. That's why we have amendments to the Constitution, for Christ's sake. It's not that people tried to ignore. The framers, when they got together for the Constitutional Convention, and they took a look at everything they'd written, and somebody came up, who was it? Was it Madison? Was it Jefferson? Who knows? I don't know. But a couple of the framers of the Constitution came up with the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. They said, wait a minute, we're leaving some shit out here. So rather than change the Constitution in form, they just added to it. They changed it, not the text of the Constitution. They just added to it with the 10 amendments. Okay. If that's what the orange Antichrist wants done in his favor, then, of course, you don't have time to do it there, orange bastard, but, you could always change the Constitution, right? Now, of course, it stands to reason that even if an amendment was added that said somebody involved in an insurrection was not prohibited from running again, that would be kind of dicey, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be a little problematic if you wanted to run a constitutional republic where people made decisions about who their leader is going to be, and then you have someone defeated in attempting to be our leader who claims yada, 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 and tries to get the Supreme Court or somebody to overturn the election, or decides to institute a rebellion, an insurrection. Oh, I'm so sick of this. Aren't you? I mean, I'm sure it takes an awful lot of effort to listen to this podcast night after night after night, or whenever you listen to it. The same shit over and over and over again, it seems like. Although I don't think that's really the case, but there are repeating themes in this Mike Malloy podcast. And as tiresome as it may be to listen to this stuff, here's my little whine for the day. Think how difficult it is to put it together. To have to go through this shit over and over and over. What's it been now? 6 years? Oh, my God. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. The Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.